The year 2485. High above the wild jungles of Zephyria, the floating cities glistened under the twin suns, suspended by the marvel of anti-gravity technology. Kael Arin, a 29-year-old engineer, sat in his office at Zenith Corp, frowning at the holographic display in front of him. Data streamed across the screen, but something unusual had caught his eye. Kael's curiosity had always driven him deeper than his job required. He often delved into the core systems of the floating cities, seeking to understand every intricacy of the anti-gravity technology that kept them aloft. Today, however, his investigation had led him to a classified folder labeled Project Genesis. "What's this?" he muttered to himself. Tapping the display to open the file, lines of text and complex schematics filled the screen. His eyes widened as he realized the implications. Zenith Corp was experimenting with the anti-gravity core itself, pushing its limits without fully understanding the consequences. If they failed, the entire city could plummet into the untamed jungle below. A knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Lyra, his closest friend and fellow engineer. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she stepped inside. "Hey, Kael. You look like you've seen a ghost." "What's up, Lyra? You need to see this," Kael said, his voice trembling slightly. He shared the data with her, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to shock. "This is insane," Lyra whispered. "If they're wrong, the entire city could fall. We have to do something." Kael nodded. "But we need proof. Concrete evidence that we can take to the public. We have to investigate further, but we'll need to be careful. If Zenith Corp catches us, I know," Lyra interrupted, determination in her voice. "But we can't just stand by and do nothing." Together, they devised a plan. Under the cover of night, they would sneak into the restricted areas of Zenith Corp's headquarters to gather more evidence. As the sun set, casting a deep crimson hue over the city, Kael and Lyra made their way through the shadows, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. Navigating through the labyrinthine corridors, they finally reached a heavily secured door. Kael's hands trembled as he hacked into the security system, bypassing the lock. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room filled with servers and equipment humming with energy. "Let's make this quick," Lyra whispered, plugging a data drive into the central console. As they downloaded the files, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Kael's heart raced. They had to hurry. Just as the transfer completed, the door burst open, and a group of corporate enforcers stormed in. "Freeze. You're under arrest." Kael and Lyra exchanged a desperate glance. With no time to think, they bolted for the back exit, the enforcers hot on their heels. They sprinted through the building, dodging security drones and lasers. Just as they reached the exit, Lyra stumbled, but Kael caught her arm, pulling her to safety. Outside, they disappeared into the jungle, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. Panting and exhausted, they took refuge in a hidden grove. "That was too close," Lyra gasped. "But we have the evidence." Kael nodded, his mind racing. "Now we need to find a way to expose Zenith Corp's plans. We have to stop them before it's too late." As the jungle's nocturnal creatures began to stir, Kael and Lyra knew their journey was far from over. The fate of the floating cities and everyone in them now rested on their shoulders. The jungle's dense foliage provided a temporary haven, but Kael and Lyra knew they couldn't stay hidden for long. With the data drive securely tucked away, they plotted their next move. They needed to reach a public forum where they could reveal Zenith Corp's plans and rally support. Navigating through the thick underbrush, they avoided the paths frequently patrolled by corporate drones. As dawn broke, they reached the outskirts of Solara City, one of Zephyria's largest floating metropolises. The city's skyline gleamed in the early light, a testament to human ingenuity, yet its future hung in the balance. "We need to get to the central plaza," Kael said, his eyes scanning for any signs of enforcers. "There's always a crowd there. We can use the public network to broadcast the evidence." Lyra nodded, wincing as she adjusted her injured leg. "Let's move quickly. The longer we wait, the greater the risk." blending with the early morning crowd, they made their way to the central plaza. The towering holographic screens that usually displayed advertisements now became their target. Kael connected the data drive to a public terminal, his fingers flying over the controls. Lyra stood guard, watching for any signs of trouble. As the files began to upload, Kael's heart pounded. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, the holographic screens flickered, and the classified documents appeared, detailing Zenith Corp's reckless experiments. Gasps of shock and murmurs of outrage rippled through the crowd. People began to gather, drawn by the unfolding scandal. Just as Kael was about to speak, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Stop them," corporate enforcers pushed through the throng, weapons drawn. Kael grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her towards a nearby alley, but they were quickly surrounded. "You two have caused enough trouble," the lead enforcer snarled, advancing on them. "Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see another day," Kael's mind raced. They were so close, but they couldn't afford to be captured. Desperation fueled his actions as he scanned their surroundings for an escape route. Then, an idea sparked. "Lyra, the rooftop," he whispered urgently. With a burst of adrenaline, they fought their way through the enforcers, scaling a nearby fire escape. The enforcers followed, but Kael and Lyra had the advantage of familiarity with the city's layout. They leaped from rooftop to rooftop, the wind whipping around them, until they reached a secluded vantage point. From their new position, they saw the crowd below growing larger and more agitated. The broadcast had struck a chord. People demanded answers, and the pressure on Zenith Corp mounted. "We did it," Lyra breathed, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over her. "But what now?" Kael looked out over the city, his resolve hardening. "Now, we need to ensure this momentum doesn't die. We have to rally the public and the government to take action against Zenith Corporation." Days passed in a blur of secret meetings and public rallies. Kael and Lyra became symbols of resistance, their story igniting a movement. Zenith Corp's executives were summoned to face inquiries, and the dangerous experiments were halted. The floating city stabilized, and the threat of collapse receded. In the aftermath, Kael visited Lyra in the hospital, where she was recovering from her injuries. He sat by her bedside, reflecting on their journey. "We made a difference, Lyra," he said softly. "But there's still so much to do. We need to ensure technology is used responsibly, for the good of all." Lyra smiled weakly, her eyes shining with determination. "And we'll do it together." Kael. For Zephyria and beyond, as Kael left the hospital, he looked out over the floating city, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The echoes of their actions would resonate through Andromeda, a reminder of the power of courage and the enduring quest for ethical advancement in a world where technology and nature must coexist. The sun set once more, casting a golden glow over Zephyria, as Kael walked into a future brimming with hope and possibilities.